Okay. Greetings, everyone. My name is Cabaldero27. Welcome back. Or I guess welcome to a stream idea that I've had for a little bit. So the thing on screen that you're seeing is just something I downloaded to play in the background while I read. I was hoping it wasn't going to keep pulling this up every time it replayed, but that's not good. I don't know how to, fix that. It's just gonna do that occasionally, I guess. Unless there was another app that I could use to play this. Hold on, just a sec. By the way, that's my laptop. Not my laptop. My thing. The computer back screen. About this. Perhaps. Repeat. Is that working? I mean, it looks like it's working. So that's good. Sorry that this is a bit off. I don't see anything popping up after a little bit, so that's good. Alright. So, today we're reading Percy Jackson by Rick Riordan, the first book. I couldn't find my paper copy of it, so I'm just reading it from the PDF. Or, I call it PDF because it's on my thing. I got it through the Books app on my iPad. So here we go. Actually, I'm going to take a sip of tea first. Oh yeah, it's all coming together now. Okay. Also, quick reminder, I have a sore throat, so this was a bad idea now that I think about it, but whatever. I may have to, cut out the sound real quick, just mute my mic, and cough or something. If it's an extended period of time, then I'm blowing my nose. So, yeah. Alright, let's start. Chapter 1. I accidentally vaporize my maths teacher. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is, close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom and dad told you about your birth, and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time it gets you killed, in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction, great. Read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it. But things really started going bad last May, when our 6th grade teacher took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Bruner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip. So I had hopes. Mr. Bruner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class that didn't put me to sleep. I hoped this trip would be okay. At least I had hoped that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Hey TJ, how's it going? We're doing reading today. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happen to me on field trips, like at my 5th grade school when we went to Saratoga battlefield. I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course I got expelled anyways. And before that, at my 4th grade school, when we took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Marine World shark pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk, and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good, all the way into the city. I put up with Nancy Bobofit. The freckly, red-headed kleptomaniac girl kept hitting my best friend, Grover, in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he's the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him, but don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Bobofit was throwing wads of sandwich that stuck in his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster had threatened me with death by in-school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. I'm going to kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay, I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back into my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who's going to get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I'd decked Nancy Bobofit right then and there. In-school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Bruner led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big, echoey galleries, past marble statues and glass cases full of really old black and orange pottery. Excuse me. It blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. He gathered us around a 4-meter-tall stone column with a big sphinx on top, and started telling us how it was a grave marker, a stele, for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the sides. I was trying to listen to what he had to say because it was kind of interesting. But everyone around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher's chaperone, Miss Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Miss Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket, even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She had come to Yancey halfway through the year when our last maths teacher had a nervous breakdown. From the first day, Miss Dodds loved Nancy Bobofit, and I figured I was the devil spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and say, "Now, honey," real sweet, and I just knew I was going to get after-school detention for a month. One time, after she'd made me erase answers out of our old math book's workbook until midnight, I told Grover I didn't think Miss Dodds was human. He looked at me real serious and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Bruner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Bobofit snickered something about a naked guy on the stele, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Bruner stopped the story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Bruner pointed to one of the pictures on the stele. "Perhaps you'd tell us what this picture represents." I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. That's Kronos eating his kids, right? Yes, Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. And he did this because... Well, I racked my brain to remember. Kronos was the king god and... God? Mr. Brunner asked. Titan, I corrected myself. And he didn't trust his kids, who were the gods, so Kronos ate them, right? But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead. And later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad, Kronos, into barfing up his brothers and sisters. Ew, said one of the girls behind me. And so there was this big fight between the gods and titans, I continued, and the gods won. Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Bobofet mumbled to a friend, like we're going to use this in real life. Like it's going to say on our job applications. Please explain why Kronos ate his kids. And why, Mr. Jackson, Brunner said. To paraphrase Miss Bobofet's excellent question, does this matter in real life? Busted, Grover muttered. Shut up, Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy got in trouble too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought about this question and shrugged. I don't know, sir. I see. Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disgorge his other 5 children, who, of course, being the immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. The gods defeated their father, sliced him into pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the deepest part, or the darkest part, of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Miss Dodds, would you lead us back outside? The class drifted off, the girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow when Mr. Brunner said, Mr. Jackson. I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going, and then I turned towards Mr. Brunner. Sir? Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go. Intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old, and had seen everything. You must learn to answer my question, Mr. Brunner told me. About the Titans? About real life, and how your studies apply to it. Oh. What you learn from me, he said, is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will only accept the best from you, Mr. Percy Jackson. I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, it was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed up in the suit of Roman armor and shouted, What ho! And challenged us, sword point against chalk, to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who had ever lived, and their mother, and what god they worshipped. But Mr. Brunner expected me to be good as everyone else, despite the fact I have dyslexia and attention deficit disorder. And I never made it above a C- in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying hard while Mr. Brunner took one long, sad look at the stele, like he'd been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered at the front steps of the museum, where we could watch the foot traffic along Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, with clouds blacker than I had ever seen over the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We've had massive storms, massive snowstorms, flooding, wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing in. No one else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeons with Lunchables crackers. Nancy Bobofet was trying to pickpocket something from a lady's bag, and of course, Miss Dodds wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat at the edge of the fountain, away from the others. We thought that maybe if we did that, everyone wouldn't know we were from that school. The school for loser freaks who couldn't make it anywhere else, or couldn't make it elsewhere. Detention? Grover said. Nah, I said. Not from Brunner. I wish he'd just lay off me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then, when I thought he was going to give me some deep philosophical comment to make me feel better, he said, "Can I have your apple?" I didn't have much of an appetite, so I let him take it. I watched the stream of cabs going down Fifth Avenue, and thought about my mom's apartment. Only a little ways uptown from where we sat. I hadn't seen her since Christmas. I wanted so bad to jump on a taxi and head home. She'd hug me and be glad to see me, but she'd be disappointed, too. She'd send me right back to Yancey, remind me that I had to try harder, even if this was my 6th school in 6 years. I was probably going to be kicked out again. I wouldn't be able to stand that sad look she'd give me. Mr. Brunner parked his wheelchair at the base of the handicapped ramp. He ate celery while he read a paperback novel. A red umbrella stuck up from the back of his chair, making it look like a motorized cafe table. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Bobofit appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she'd gotten tired of stealing from the tourists, and dumped her half-eaten lunch in Grover's lap. "Oops," she grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if somebody had spray-painted her face with liquid Cheetos. I tried to stay cool. The school counselor had told me a million times. Count to 10. Get control of your temper. But I was so mad that my mind went blank. A wave roared in my ears. I don't remember touching her, but the next thing I knew, Nancy was sitting on her butt in the fountain, screaming, "Percy pushed me!" Miss Dodds materialized next to us. Some of the kids were whispering, "Did you see? The water. It grabbed her." I didn't know what they were talking about. All I knew is I was in trouble again. As soon as Miss Dodds was sure poor little Nancy was okay, promising to get her a new shirt at the museum gift shop, etc., etc., Miss Dodds turned to me. There was a triumphant fire in her eyes, as if I'd done something she'd been waiting for all semester. "Now, honey..." "I know," I grumbled. "A month erasing textbooks." That wasn't the right thing to say. "Come with me," Miss Dodds said. "Wait!" Grover yelled. "It was me. I pushed her." I stared at him, stunned. I couldn't believe he was trying to cover for me. Miss Dodds scared Grover to death. She glared at him so hard his whiskery chin trembled. "I don't think so, Mr. Underwood," she said. But you will stay here." Grover looked at me desperately. "It's okay, man," I told him. "Thanks for trying." "Honey," Miss Dodds barked at me. "Now!" Nancy Bobofit smirked. I gave her my deluxe "I'll kill you later" stare, and I turned to face Miss Dodds, but she wasn't there. She was standing at the museum entrance, way at the top of the steps, gesturing impatiently at me to come on. How'd she get there so fast? I have moments like that a lot, when my brain falls asleep or something, and the next thing I know I've missed something, as if a puzzle piece fell out of the universe, and left me staring at the blank place behind it. The school counselor told me this was part of the ADHD. My brain misinterpreting things. I wasn't so sure. I went after Miss Dodds. Halfway up the steps, I glanced over at Grover. He was looking pale, cutting his eyes between me and Mr. Brunner, like he wanted Mr. Brunner to notice what was going on. But Mr. Brunner was absorbed in his novel. I looked back up. Miss Dodds disappeared again. She was now inside the building, at the end of the entrance hall. Okay, I thought, she's going to make me buy a new shirt with Nancy at the gift shop, but apparently that wasn't the plan. I followed her deeper into the museum. When I finally caught up to her, we were back in the Greek and Roman section. Except for us, the gallery was empty. Miss Dodds stood with her arms crossed in front of a big marble frieze of the Greek gods. Phrase? F-R-I-E-Z-E. Phrase. She was making weird noises in her throat, like growling. Even without the noise, I would have been nervous. It's weird being alone with a teacher, especially Miss Dodds. Something about the way she looked at the frieze, as if she wanted to pulverize it. "You've been giving us problems, honey," she said. I did the safe thing. Said, "Yes, ma'am." She tugged on the cuffs of her leather jacket. "Did you really think you would get away with it?" The look in her eyes was beyond mad. It was evil. She's a teacher, I thought nervously. It's not like she's gonna hurt me. I said, I'll try harder, ma'am. Thunder shook the building. We are not fools, Percy Jackson. Miss Dodds said, It was only a matter of time before we found you out. Confess, and you will suffer less pain. I didn't know what she was talking about. All I could think of was that the other teachers must have found the illegal stash of candy I'd been selling out of my dorm room. Or maybe they'd realized I'd gotten my essay on Tom Sawyer from the internet, without ever reading the book. And now they were going to take away my grade. Or worse, they were going to make me read the book. Well, she demanded. Ma'am, I don't... Your time is up, she hissed. Then the weirdest thing happened. Her eyes began to glow like barbecue coals. Her fingers stretched, turning her talons... Her fingers stretched, turning into talons. Her jacket melted into large, leathery wings. She wasn't human. She was shriveled, or she was a shriveled hag with bat wings and claws and a mouth full of yellow fangs. She was about to slice me to ribbons. Then things got even stranger. Mr. Brunner, who had been out front of the museum a minute before, wheeled his chair into the doorway of the gallery, holding a pen in his hand. What ho, Percy! He shouted, and tossed the pen What ho, Percy! He shouted, and tossed the pen through the air. Miss Dodge lunged at me. With a yelp, I dodged, and felt talons slash through the air next to my ear. I snatched the ballpoint pen out of the air, but when it hit my hand, it wasn't a pen anymore. It was a sword. Mr. Brunner's bronze sword, which he always used on tournament day. Miss Dodds spun towards me with a murderous look in her eyes. My knees were jelly. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the sword. She snarled, Die, honey! And she flew straight at me. Absolute terror ran through my body. I did the only thing that came naturally. I swung the sword. The metal blade hit her shoulder and passed clean through her body as if she were made of water. Hiss! Sorry about that. Miss Dodds was a sandcastle and a power fan. What a sentence. She exploded into yellow powder, vaporized on the spot, leaving nothing but the smell of sulfur and a dying screech, and a chill of evil in the air, as if those two glowing red eyes were still watching me. I was alone. There was a ballpoint pen in my hand. Mr. Brunner wasn't there. Nobody was here but me. My hands were still trembling. My lunch must have been contaminated with magic and mushrooms or something. And I imagined the whole thing. I went back inside, and it started to rain. Grover was sitting by the fountain, a museum map tented over his hand. Nancy Bobofet was still standing there, soaked from her swim in the fountain, grumbling to her ugly friends. When she saw me, I said, I hope Miss Kerr whipped your butt. I said, Who? Our teacher, duh. I blinked. We had no teacher named Mrs. Kerr. I asked Nancy what she was talking about. She just rolled her eyes and turned away. I asked Grover where Miss Dodds was. He said, Who? But then he paused first and he wouldn't look at me. So I thought he was messing with me. Not funny, man, I told him. This is serious. Thunder boomed overhead. I saw Mr. Brunner sitting under his red umbrella, reading his book, as if he'd never moved. I went over to him. He looked up a little distracted. Ah, that would be my pen. Please bring your own utensils in the future, Mr. Jackson. I handed it over. I hadn't even realized I was still holding it. Sir, I said, where's Mrs. Dodds? He stared at me blankly. Who? The other chaperone, Miss Dodds, the maths teacher. He frowned and sat forward, looking mildly concerned. Percy, there is no Miss Dodds on this trip. As far as I know, there has never been a Miss Dodds at Yancey Academy. Are you feeling all right? All right, I'm going to take a drink of my tea real quick. Just give me a sec. Oh yeah, that's better. Chapter 2. 3 old ladies knit the socks of death. I know what that's referencing, and that's so good. I was used to the occasional weird experience, but usually they were over quickly. This 24/7 hallucination was more than I could handle. For the rest of the school year, the entire campus seemed to be playing some kind of trick on me. The students acted as if they were completely and totally convinced that Miss Kerr, a perky blonde woman who I had never seen in my life until she got on her bus at the end of the field trip, had been our maths teacher since Christmas. Ever so often I would spring a Miss Dodds reference on someone just to see if I could trip them up, but they would stare at me like I was a psycho. It got so I almost believed them. Miss Dodds had never existed. Almost. But Grover couldn't fool me. When I mentioned the name Dodds to him, he would hesitate, then claim she didn't exist. But I knew he was lying. Something was going on. Something had happened at the museum. I didn't have much time to think about it during days, but at night, visions of Miss Dodds with talons and leathery wings would wake me up in a cold sweat. The freak weather continued, which didn't help my mood. One night, a thunderstorm blew out the windows of my dorm room. A few days later, the biggest tornado ever spotted in the Hudson Valley touched down only 50 miles from Yancey Academy. One of the current events we studied in social studies class was an unusual number of small planes that had gone down in sudden squalls in the Atlantic that year. I started to feel cranky and irritable most of the time. My grades slipped from D's to F's. I got into more fights with Nancy Bobofit and her friends, and I was sent out in the hallway in almost every class. Finally, when our English teacher, Mr. Nicole, asked me for the millionth time why I was too lazy to study for spelling tests, I snapped, and I called him an old sot. I wasn't even sure what it meant, but it sounded good. The headmaster sent my mom a letter the following week, making it official. I would not be invited back next year to Yancey Academy. Fine, I told myself. Just fine. I was homesick. I wanted to be with my mom in our little apartment on Upper East Side. Even if I had to go to public school, I put up with my obnoxious stepfather and his stupid poker parties. And yet, there were things I'd miss at Yancey. The view of the woods out of my dorm window, the Hudson River in the distance, the smell of pine trees. I'd miss Grover, who'd been a good friend even if he was a little strange. I worried how he'd survive next year without me. I'd miss Latin class too. Mr. Bruner's crazy tournament days and his father. What? I just got mixed up. Hold on. I'd miss Latin class too. Mr. Bruner's crazy tournament days and his faith that I could do well. As the exam week got closer, Latin was the only test I studied for. I hadn't forgotten what Mr. Bruner had told me about the subject being life and death for me. I wasn't sure why, but I'd started to believe him. The evening before I got my final, I was so frustrated that I threw the Cambridge Guide to Greek Mythology across my dorm room. Words had started swimming off the page, circling my head. The letters were doing 180s, as if they were riding skateboards. There was no way that I was going to remember the difference between Chiron and Charon, or polydictes and polydeuces. And conjugating those Latin verbs, forget it. I paced the room, feeling like ants were crawling around inside my shirt. Yikes. I remember Mr. Brunner's serious expression, his 1,000-year-old eyes. I will only accept the best from you, Percy Jackson. I took a deep breath and picked up the mythology book. I never asked a teacher for help before. Maybe if I talked to Mr. Brunner, excuse me. Maybe if I talked to Mr. Brunner, he could give me some pointers. At least I could apologize for the big fat F I was about to score on his exam. I didn't want to leave Yancey Academy with him thinking I hadn't tried. I walked downstairs to the faculty offices. Most of them were dark and empty, but Mr. Brunner's door was ajar. Light from his window stretched across the hallway floor. I was 3 steps from the door handle when I heard voices inside the office. Mr. Brunner asked a question. A voice that was definitely Grover's said, "Worry about Percy, sir." I froze. I'm not usually an eavesdropper, but I dare you to try not listening in if you hear your best friend talking about you about. Give me a quick second. All right. Where was I? Um... I'm not usually an eavesdropper, but I dare you to try not listening if you hear your best friend talking about you to an adult. I inched closer. Alone this summer, Grover was saying. I mean, a kindly one in the school. Now we know for sure that they know too. We would only be making matters worse by rushing him, Mr. Brunner said. We need the boy to mature more. But he may not have time. The summer solstice deadline will have to be resolved without him, Grover. Let him enjoy his ignorance while he still can. Sir, he saw her. His imagination, Mr. Brunner insisted. The mist over the students and the staff will be enough to convince him of that. Sir, I can't fail my duties again. Grover's voice was choked with emotion. You know what that would mean. You haven't failed, Grover, Mr. Brunner said kindly. I should have seen her for what she was. Now let's just worry about keeping Percy alive until next autumn. The mythology book dropped out of my hand. The mythology book dropped out of my hand and hit the floor with a thud. Mr. Brunner went silent. My heart hammering, I picked up the book and backed down the hall. A shadow slid across the lighted glass of Brunner's office door. The shadow of something much taller than my wheelchair-bound teacher, holding something that looked suspiciously like an archer's bow. I opened the nearest door and slipped inside. A few seconds later, I heard a slow clop, 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 like muffled wood blocks when a sound like an animal's snuffling out. Snuffling? That is the real world, or the real word. Whew. Snuffling right outside my door. A large, dark shape paused in front of the glass, then moved on. A bead of sweat trickled down my neck. Somewhere in the hallway, Mr. Brunner spoke. Nothing, he murmured. My nerves haven't been quite right since the winter solstice. Mine neither, Grover said. But I could have sworn. Go back to the dorm, Mr. Brunner told him. You've got a long day of exams tomorrow. Don't remind me. The lights went out at Mr. Brunner's office. I waited in the dark for what seemed like forever. Finally, I slipped out into the hallway and made my way back up to the dorm. Grover was lying on his bed, studying Latin exam notes, like he'd been there all night. Hey, he said bleary-eyed. You gonna be ready for this test? I didn't answer. You look awful, he frowned. Is everything all right? Okay, is the word. Not all right, okay, but they're synonymous, so whatever. Just tired. I turned so he couldn't read my expression and started getting ready for bed. I didn't understand what I had heard downstairs. I wanted to believe I'd imagined the whole thing. But one thing was clear. Blah, 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 blah. I think after this chapter I'm going to stop. But one thing was clear. Grover and Mr. Brunner were talking about me behind my back. They thought I was in some kind of danger. The next afternoon, as I was leaving the 3-hour Latin exam, my eyes swimming with all the Greek and Roman names I had misspelled, Mr. Brunner called me back inside. For a moment I was worried he'd found out about my eavesdropping the night before. But that didn't seem to be the problem. Percy, he said, don't be discouraged about leaving Yancey. It's for the best. His tone was kind, but the words still embarrassed me. Even though he was speaking quietly, the other kids finishing the tests could hear. Nancy Bobofit smirked at me and made sarcastic little kissing motions with her lips. I mumbled, Okay, sir. I mean, Mr. Brunner wheeled his wheelchair back and forth like he wasn't so sure what to see, or what to say. This isn't the right place for you. It was only a matter of time. My eyes stung. It was my favorite teacher in front of the class telling me I couldn't handle it. After he believed in me all year, now he was telling me I was destined to get kicked out. Right, I said, trembling. No, Mr. Brunner said. Oh, confound it all. What I was trying to say, you're not normal, Percy. That's nothing to be... Thanks, I blurted out. Thanks a lot, sir, for reminding me. Percy... But I was already gone. On the last day of the term, I shoved my clothes into my suitcase. The other guys were joking around, talking about their vacation plans. One of them was going on a hiking trip to Switzerland. Another was cruising the Caribbean for a month. They were juvenile delinquents, like me, but they were rich juvenile delinquents. Their daddies were executives or ambassadors or celebrities. I was a nobody, from a family of nobodies. They asked me what I would be doing this summer, and I told them that I was going back to the city. What I didn't tell them was that I'd have to get a summer job walking dogs or selling magazine subscriptions and spend my free time worrying about where I'd go to school in the autumn. "Oh," one of the guys said, "that's cool." They went back to their conversation as if I'd never existed. The only person I dreaded saying goodbye to was Grover. But as it turned out, I didn't have to. He'd booked a ticket to Manhattan on the same Greyhound that I had. I don't know what that is, but okay. I assume it's a bus. Or a train. So there we were, together again, heading into the city. During the whole bus ride, Grover kept glancing nervously down the aisle, watched the other passengers. It occurred to me he'd always acted nervous and fidgety when we left Yancey, as if he expected something bad to happen. Before, I'd always assumed he was worried about getting teased, but there was nobody to tease him on the Greyhound. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I said, "Looking for kindly ones?" Grover nearly jumped out of his seat. "What do you mean?" I confessed about the eavesdropping on him and Mr. Bruner the night before the exam. Grover's eye twitched. "How much did you hear?" "Oh, not much. What's the summer solstice deadline?" He winced. "Look, Percy, I was just worried for you, you see? I mean, hallucinating about demon math teachers." "Grover. And I was telling Mr. Bruner that maybe you were overstressed or something because there was no such person as Mr. Dodds, and Grover, you're a really, really bad liar." His ears turned pink. From his shirt pocket, he'd fished out a grubby business card. "Just take this, okay, in case you need me this summer." The card was in fancy script, which was murder on my dyslexic eyes, but I finally made out something like Grover Underwood, keeper, Half-Blood Hill, Long Island, New York, in brackets, 800-09-999, or 0009-00009. Wait, that's too many. God damn it. Hold on. 800-009-0009. There we go. I wonder what would happen if you actually called that number now, if it even exists. We're not doing it right now. We have 3 pages left. Don't say it out loud, he yelled. "That's my, summer address." My heart sank. Grover had a summer home. I never considered his family might be as rich as the others at Yancey. "Okay," I said glumly, "so if I, want to come visit your mansion?" He nodded. Or if you need me." "Why would I need you?" It came out harsher than I meant it to. Grover blushed right down to his Adam's apple. "Look, Percy, the truth is I kind of have to protect you." I stared at him. All year long, I'd gotten in fights keeping bullies away from him. I'd lost sleep worrying that he'd get beaten up the next year without me. And here he was, acting like he was the one who defended me. "Grover," I said, "what exactly are you protecting me from?" There was a huge grinding noise beneath our feet. Black smoke poured out from the dashboard, and the whole bus smelled like a... My ADHD and dyslexia is making this difficult. Where was I? There was a huge grinding noise under our feet. Black smoke poured out from the dashboard, and the whole bus filled with the smell like rotten eggs. The driver cursed and limped the Greyhound over to the side of the highway. After a few minutes clanking around in the engine compartment, the driver announced that we'd all have to get off. Grover and I filed outside with everyone else. We were on a stretch of country road, no place you'd notice if you didn't break down there. On our side of the highway was nothing but maple trees and litter from passing cars. On the other side, across 4 lanes of asphalt, shimmering with afternoon heat, was an old-fashioned fruit stand. The stuff on sale looked really good, heaping boxes of blood-red cherries and apples, walnuts and apricots, jugs of cider in a clawfoot tub full of ice. There was no customers, just 3 old ladies sitting in rocking chairs in the side of a maple tree. knitting the biggest pair of socks I'd ever seen. I mean, these socks were the size of sweaters, but they were clearly socks. The lady on the right knitted one of them. The lady on the left knitted the other. The lady in the middle held an enormous basket of electric blue yarn. All three women looked ancient, with pale faces wrinkled like fruit leather. Silver hair tied back in white bandanas, bony arms sticking out of bleached cotton dresses. The weirdest thing was they seemed to be looking right at me. I looked over at Grover to say something about this, and watched that the blood had drained from his face. His nose was twitching. Grover? I said, "Hey man, tell me they're not looking at you." "They are, aren't they?" "Yeah. Weird, huh? You think those socks would fit me?" "Not funny, Percy. Not funny at all." The old lady in the middle took out a huge pair of scissors, gold and silver. Long-bladed, like shears. I heard Grover catch his breath. "We're getting on the bus," you told me. "Come on." "What?" I said. "It's 1,000 degrees in there." "Come on," he prized open the door and climbed inside. But I stayed back, across the road. The old ladies were still watching me. The middle one cut the yarn, and I swear I heard that snip across 4 layers of traffic. Her 2 friends balled up the electric blue socks, leaving me wondering who they might possibly be for. Sasquatch or Godzilla? At the rear of the bus, the driver wrenched a big chunk of smoking metal out of the engine compartment. The bus shuddered, and the engine roared back to life. The passengers cheered. "Darn right!" yelled the driver. He slapped the bus with his hat. "Everybody back on board!" Once we got going, I started to feel feverish, as if I caught the flu. Grover didn't look much better. He was shivering, and his teeth were chattering. "Grover?" "Yeah." "What are you not telling me?" He dabbed his forehead with his shirt sleeve. "Percy, what did you see back there at the fruit stand?" "You mean the old ladies? What about them, man? They're not like Mrs. Dodds, are they?" His expression was hard to read, but I got the feeling that the fruit stand ladies were something much, much worse than Miss Dodds. He said, "Just tell me what you saw." "The middle one took out her scissors, and she cut the yarn." He closed his eyes and made a gesture with his fingers that might have been crossing himself. But it wasn't. It was something else. Something almost older. He said, "You saw her snip the cord." "Yeah, so?" But as I said it, I knew it was a big deal. "This is not happening," Grover mumbled. He started chewing at his thumb. I don't want this to be like the last time." "What last time?" "Always 6th grade. They never get past 6th. "Grover," I said, because he was really starting to scare me. "What are you talking about? Let me walk you home from the bus station. Promise me." This seemed like a strange request to me, but I promised he could. "Is this like a superstition or something?" I asked. No answer. "Grover, that snipping of yarn, does that mean somebody's going to die?" He looked at me mournfully, like he was already picking the kind of flowers I'd like best on my coffin. Alright, I think that's all I'm going to read today. I massively underestimated how long each chapter would be. I thought we'd be halfway through the book already, but we were like chapter 2 out of like 20 or something. So we're going to have to hold that off for later. This isn't going to be the only stream that I do today. We're going to actually be playing games again. So if you want to go and come and watch me play something else, well, come and watch me play something else. I'll be around. All right. That's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll continue to read at some other time. Not today, but some other time. Bye.